Okay, let's start our session today. We have a nice big crowd with us. Hi, everybody. It's New York Textile Month, all of September, which is an initiative by Lee Edelcourt, who needs no introduction. New York Textile Month is a festival designed to celebrate textiles and bring together museums, galleries, retailers, design studios, independent practitioners, students, and all of you as a community. Today, we launch our first edition of Textile TV, a series of conversations with leaders in textiles, art, and design. I'm your host, Sagarika Sundaram. I'm an artist and deputy editor of this year's issue of Talking Textiles, a magazine we publish. I will be hosting conversations every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Today, I'm delighted to invite Erin M. Riley to Textile TV. Welcome, Erin. Erin is an incredible artist and a weaver who, for the past 10 years, has built a vast body of work in the textile medium. Erin uses traditional tapestry to create contemporary weavings that are commentary on themes like gender, sexuality, trauma, addiction, and queer identity. Erin draws from a deeply personal archive of imagery, often integrating photos she takes herself using her phone and composing them into an abstract narrative composition. Her works are political. And today we're going to learn more about her practice and her take on the role textiles can play in activism. The format is as follows. Erin will take us through a brief overview of her practice, which we'll move into a conversation. We'll then be taking questions from all of you, so please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And this session is going to be uploaded on YouTube and Instagram, so people will be able to watch it at a later moment. So I'm going to hand it over to Erin now. Thank you, Erin, for joining us. We're so happy to have you here with us today, launching
Thanks for
Textile
having me.
TV.
Yeah, so I will share my screen and show you what I've been working on and thinking about. Let's see. So this is an older piece, but it's I'm a tapestry weaver. I work on 3 different looms in my studio, and so this is the largest loom, and I weave it at 6 ends per inch on the large loom and 8 ends per inch on the medium and small loom. So these larger pieces have a slightly more pixelated look to them because I'm using larger yarns, and a lot of it is hand dyed and using a cartoon. So I'm drawing a sketch using images that I'm sort of collecting. This work is made with a screenshot from the TV show Intervention. So thinking about like addiction and death and sort of the watching of somebody you love or somebody you care about, sort of like going down these roads. And this is an older piece, but while I've been in quarantine, I've been making these other larger pieces. These are 8 feet wide, 100 inches wide, and thinking sort of about the same idea of fear and silence, and sort of the idea of like being an onlooker. And so this is a super large piece, using mixtures of yarn that I've dyed and sort of abstract bruising. And then these are some sort of vintage domestic violence pamphlets that I've been looking at. So, and then so like I've dyed these, and then I've Thioxed them. So I've boiled them in bleach, so they've faded a bit. And this is articles from my great grandmother's murder which is something that I've also been weaving. I've been weaving this piece. So I've been thinking about these like silent things that we sort of hold, like intergenerational trauma and being survivors, and how these stories can sort of trigger us, but then also like how they build to who we actually are, our identities, how we experience the world. And so it's all hand woven tapestry, but I do use like shuttles, and I use floor looms. So there is the speed of treadling. And these are some more detailed shots of that piece.
Incredibly detailed.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about like, I've been thinking a lot about like memory and sort of like building these stories through memory, as well as fact, because memory isn't a fact, and our memories are flawed, especially in families. Like we have these experiences that our siblings might experience differently, and sort of the marks that are made on our body. These are some detailed shots of a piece that I'm working on my big loom, of sort of like self-harm and bruising. So like different kinds of scarring. Like, so there's the bruising on the hand, which is made from somebody else, but this one is made, these sort of secret marks I make sometimes on my body, which this whole quarantine has all been about like talking about the things that I've never really talked about. So and then these are some pieces that I've sort of just made about, or of my high school journals. So these are like these crazy detailed like compositional notebooks that I carried around, and like the one on the left says there is a way out, and I'm just thinking about this idea that like, you know, I existed as a teenager, and it was like on my notebooks that I was struggling, but there was no one that really like reached out, or like in the greater community, like, and how can we be better onlookers and sort of help. And so these are some images of my looms. This is my small loom, Dorset loom, which is this sort of amazing tiny loom that I bring to residencies. And then this is my large loom, which is a 100-inch, and it's great. And then this is the medium-sized loom, which is the loom I work on the majority of the time. And then this is my studio setup. So my yarn, which a lot of the yarn I get from various places. So sometimes people will give me yarn that they've had in their studio, or a family member passes away and they give me yarn, which is like sort of the skeins hanging. Those are someone's mother's collection, which is really special to me. And then there's some cones that have been donated to me. And then I do get a lot of like rug wool that is natural, and then I dye it. So I think that's the end.
Wonderful. That's a really lovely insight into the way you make your work. So what are the themes, like right now you mentioned quarantine, you mentioned lockdown, where is your mind at, and what are the themes that you're responding to?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been trying to sort of think about, you know, I've been thinking a lot about just sort of experience and memory and trauma. And then sort of as quarantine has progressed, and as all of these, you know, social justice things are coming more and more, and there's all these accounts of sort of like talking about abuses, like, you know, in museums and various racial sort of, you know, people telling their experiences. And I think so much about trauma is the power, like people hold power because people who experience trauma keep secrets, you know, like there's this idea that like there's this like strength in silently surviving. And I think that's something that I grew up with. You know, all of the women in my family back generations held secrets as this strength, you know, but in the end that was sort of like their undoing because it was never dealt with. And it's, you know, it's like my great grandmother that sort of inflicted trauma throughout the generations. And I think like it's only just being spoken about, and sort of the impact that experience had on my grandmother and my mother and all of these women who were sort of lauded as being strong women, but in the end held these things that like were their breaking points. And so I'm just trying to think about like how do we change that that idea that like speaking about something makes us weaker or like messy, you know, or like the troublemakers, when in the reality is that like the people like the, you know, the bullies at high school or the people who make things uncomfortable, they're the problem, you know, like how do we make their lives, how do we change their directions rather than changing to experience the world safer with them in it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a lot.
Yeah. And so these, I mean, you're thinking about power and reclaiming
Mm-hmm.
power. And how did you, I mean, you study textiles, and how did you choose tapestry weaving as the particular medium that spoke to you?
Yeah. I mean, I learned about weaving, I learned about textiles as this sort of really powerful medium, you know, learning about like Magdalena Apicanowics, who makes giant, huge pieces, you know, seeing those pieces as like a 19, 20-year-old and seeing looms and being like, how did this come from this, you know? And like her materials and just like the scale was amazing. And so there was always this idea that like anything was possible. You just had to like learn how to do it and do it well, and then translate those skills to whatever, like the skills were always the problem, you know, in college especially. And so tapestry, I was always like interested in painting and composition and narrative and color, and tapestry felt the most sort of like easily translated to like what I wanted to be trying to say. You know, I don't think I was necessarily like saying what I wanted to say in college, but I was going in the direction of creating narrative textiles in college.
And tapestry weaving is obviously has this incredible heritage and history. How much of this history are you connecting with and researching, or is it just, you know, tell us about that part of your practice?
Yeah, I kind of didn't research a lot of that, because to me in college, or like to me like when I was coming to textiles, that stuff felt very alienating. That felt like kings and castles. It was very much like not where I was existing, you know. I was like going to punk shows, and I was like this young person going like hanging out in the loom room and making weird tapestries. So to me that stuff felt very stuffy, and it felt very much like ordered, you know. It was like manufactured, and like they were just reproducing images, you know. And now as I get older and the more I look at that work, the more I see the human in it, the more I can recognize the sort of trails of someone's path. And I have, you know, sort of recently been visiting places like Dovecot in Edinburgh, and sort of starting to understand like vertical warp tapestry, and like, you know, different ways that tapestry is historically made. So yeah.
And because it's, you know, tapestry weaving is like, it's a technical, you know, discipline, and it's a, you know, there's a rigor to it, and you operate as a contemporary artist in a field where you know, it's mixed. Everybody's working all these different media. How do you explain what you do to your audience when there is like a learning barrier that people
Mhm.
have to understand your work fully?
Yeah, I think there is this like almost like a it's okay if people don't get how hard it is kind of thing, you know? Like I think so much of crafts has this like we pat each other on the back for how much skill it takes. And I think that is very much something that I don't necessarily love about crafts. I don't think it matters like where you went to school, like, you know, who taught you, you know. I think it matters like how excited you are about the work you're making or the medium. You know, it doesn't matter if you're doing something wrong unless it's because it's yours to do it with. And so I think I explain, like, you know, I used to call my work like hand woven tapestries, hand dyed wool, and it would be very like explaining. And I've sort of, if I want to have that conversation, I will, but sometimes that conversation stunts people's investigation of the sort of narrative of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So they're stuck on the sort of process conversation of hand woven and like the looms, and there's this sort of like shock and awe of it being made by me. And I don't necessarily need to have that conversation unless it's something that's like they get, you know. It's not like I don't need points for that. Like in grad school, people were always like giving me like extra credit because it's hand woven, you know, and I didn't ever want that. You know, I wanted to talk about what I was showing them rather than what it was, how it was made.
Yeah, you wanted to communicate.
Yeah.
And so, how did you end up? What was the journey of when did you start integrating selfies, photographs of yourself? We see a lot of tattoos and body markings, whether it's, you know, choice or out of compulsion. Like, what was the thought process? And, you know, was this there from the beginning, or did you find things arrive in your imagery that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I in grad school I was making work about my family and sort of thinking about more domestic ideas of sisterhood and motherhood, and then after grad school I was very much free. You know, I'm in my studio by myself and no one's looking at this work. There's no crits on the calendar, and so I started making work that I just kind of wanted to make. You know, I was online and I was experiencing the world as a person, and so I started weaving selfie imagery, you know, sort of like online content imagery, and then that work started being seen and sort of talked about, and the idea of ownership and image sharing, and sort of like this idea of whose images are these, and did you get permissions and all of those things. So I moved from sort of grabbing images online to using my own images, because that's what I was doing all along. Like these images were very much like about what I was thinking about. You know, it was about like me as a sexual person sending selfies and privacy, intimacy, all of these things. But I was using other people's images as stand-ins, and so spending time understanding feminism and sort of this idea of like, why am I not putting myself in there? I realized like I had to step it up and put myself in these pieces to sort of claim this content rather than be like an onlooker. I am a participant in this image sharing. You know, there's like and so you have to sort of contend with that, the implications of that. And yeah, so that's how I started using my own images. And you know, when I was little, I was always making self-portraits, and you know, like that's like what you do. And in those early years, there's like everyone had cameras, like 35mm cameras, so you're always like taking pictures in the mirror. And I think self-portraiture is like so human, you know, it's like you're always wanting to sort of tell the world you are here. And so, yeah.
I mean, so technology, you know, we see how you use technology to bring yourself into the work. Technology plays another role in your practice in that you're very vocal on Instagram and social media about your values and politics, both personal politics and, what's happening in the world around us. And very recently, you put out a call. In fact, just this morning, I got a reminder at 5 p.m. today. There's the first meeting where you put out a call for to gather textile artists organizing for democracy, and you're bringing together people again using technology. Can you tell us more about this? And
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah,
what
I mean,
role? Yeah, and
it was kind of like sort of, I mean, we were talking before this, this idea that like through quarantine, we've all been sort of like in each other's DMs, like sort of creating these networks that maybe would never have existed over if quarantine hasn't or this pandemic hasn't happened. And we weren't stuck inside and sort of like trying to sort of reach, you know, we're all sort of reaching to sort of connect. And so a textile artist that I know through the Textile Art Center in Brooklyn, she contacted me to talk about like this idea of what do we do? You know, there's an upcoming election and like everything feels sort of hopeless, and how do we organize to, you know, like get people together? And we're gonna be talking about this organization called Movement Voter Project, which is basically doing the work of offline. You know, it's the stuff that, you know, these posts say, like tell your grandparents and tell your friends who don't have the internet and tell your neighbors, you know. So we're sort of like pooling our efforts to raise some money so that they can keep doing what they need to do to get people to vote and like support that, the idea of democracy. You know, it's not a candidate based thing. It's not about any of that. It's just the idea of like support on the ground and getting communities to the polls and supporting them at the polls and all of that. So it, you know, it's a, you know, it's like, it's, what do we do, you know, as artists? It's like I've throughout this whole time I've put work up for charity auctions, and, you know, like we raise money and we do all these things, but we're not, in many ways, artists aren't activists. You know, like we are quiet little in our studios, like we're isolating, and that's our safe space. And so I think like, how do we sort of join together? And so yeah, I'm gonna be like making these postcard packs that people can buy on a sliding scale so that like I can raise some money, and then also like send mail, because mail is great. So it should be good. I don't know.
so why textile artists, and what role do you think textiles specifically can play in this movement?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think I've always had this thesis that textile artists are the sort of least advocated for because we are the most happy within our medium. You know, like we don't need a lot of like, you know, these old, maybe this isn't true, like we have egos obviously, but I think there's this pleasure in making that we have, and that we're quietly making, and then all of a sudden we forget to, you know, advocate for ourselves, how it needs to be hung, how it needs to be talked about. And so I think like there's something, I felt very strange, you know, like organizing based around textiles, but I think there is something very political about like using a voice that's rarely heard, and claiming a space that often has like implications that are derogatory. You know, like calling someone textile artist or calling someone a fiber artist within the contemporary art scene can sometimes be a derogatory term. And so like claiming that space and standing by that space and using it as like a platform to hold power, I think is something that's kind of like an uncomfortable but cool space to inhabit, you know.
And did you experience that when you were starting out and, people sort of condescending upon your medium? How did you navigate?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's always the time like at a opening when someone's like, "What do you do?" or whatever, and then I say I'm a tapestry artist, and they sort of like recede, from they want to move on to the next group of people. And I've kind of enjoyed that like juxtaposition of like just saying that and then like allowing people to judge me and allowing their their bias to show. Um, and
I think that bias is.
I think it's a school thing. I think it's like the idea that like going to a painting program is very prestigious, but textiles is very much like an insular medium. Like what what is good, what is hard, what requires skill. Like these are things that, and this is why a lot of textiles get kept on the back burner, is because a lot of like fine, contemporary art people don't know what is involved in the work. And so work doesn't need like to be special because it's hard or because it requires skill, but there is work that is incredibly minimalist that requires tons of skill, and I think there is this like Annie Albert's work, she's like a mathematician, and I think like going to those shows as a onlooker and who doesn't know anything about weaving or looms, you could sort of think it's like slightly boring, but going to those shows is like mind blowing. And I think understanding process allows you to like creep into those secret spaces of like awe and wonder. And unfortunately, not knowing those things keeps you away from that. And that is, that is a shame. But it is given a bad rap, textiles, in a lot of spaces.
Well, you are certainly changing that. That's for sure. Thank you for that. Tell us a little bit more about your relationship with color and materiality. Why did you gravitate? We have a textile literate audience with us today, so we can nerd out a little bit. So why did you choose the yarn you choose? What's your favorite kind of yarn? What ply are you using? And what leads you to certain material decisions or color decisions that you take?
Yeah, I mean, I work, starting out, I was using a lot of, I was on eBay a lot. So I was like looking at the cheapest yarn, the most yarn I could get for the least amount of money. And I came to this, like these sort of lot, like I would get a bunch of yarn, and it was all production excess. So it was like yarn rug manufacturers and their warehouses full of yarn, and they're selling off their dye lots. So I started really just excelling at using this 2-ply rug wool. It's not great, it's nothing fancy. It doesn't smell good. There's that yarn that sort of smells like a barn, and I love that yarn, but it's way too expensive to be using for the scale that I weave at. But sometimes I'll get that yarn and I like will smell it. I wish I could wear that smell of beautiful wool. But so I'm using a lot of that, and then also I randomly will get someone saying, I have this amazing sort of like network of people who like, I've gotten emails that are like, can you come tomorrow and empty this warehouse? We have this weird box. We don't know what it is. And I'm always like, I'll be there, like, and if I can't use it, then I'll move it to whoever can. So I'm always down to rescue yarn. And I think it's like, there is a lot of waste within textiles. It's horribly wasteful. And so I think there's, so I'm not going to not use yarn because it's cotton or because it's thin. I'll spend 8 hours plying together super thin yarn so that I can use it for a piece. because to me, it's like that wool has been spun by somebody. It's been put on, there's the human labor behind that product. And I want it to be used, you know, like otherwise it's just gonna rot away or be like some interior design moment, you know. I want to use it. So I'm not like a elitist when it comes to yarn. Yeah, I try not to fall in love with yarn because then I always know I'm not going to be able to afford it, or like they'll run out of the color. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then you don't want to create that dependency on that.
Yes, yeah. So, and I dye a lot of my yarns, and so there's like dye lots that I use, or like a lot of mixing. So
yeah.
So,
I mean, tell us a little bit more about your dyeing process. I mean, we are based in New York. Spaces are limited. Where do you go and dye your yarn?
Yeah, I do like a small hot plate in the studio. So like I have like a lobster pot. I used to use a what are they called? Like an electric cooker thing that was like, you know, you turn it on and it gets really hot, and but it took up so much space that I got rid of it during a move. But now I just use like a big lobster pot and acid dye, and I just if it's a nice day out, I'll put it outside of my apartment and just like sit outside and watch it drip. Otherwise, it's something that I hang in my studio and make the space for, and like lay down plastic. So I'll dye a lot at a time so that I can just have a dye day and then have it all dry and then weave after that. So.
It's a different way of thinking, right? Dyeing and then weaving is like a mental mode.
Yeah, and warping is a day. Like I don't weave when I warp as kind of a superstition.
Tell us more about that. What do you mean?
Yeah, I sort of have this idea that like you can't weave on like a freshly warped loom. It has to like rest. There's like this like the creaks and the stretching, and you know, I obviously with tapestry I keep my warp super tight. So there's like I just like, you know, follow my superstitions as they go. I don't want to mess with anything. I don't want to think that I'm in charge, because in the reality is like the loom's in charge, the yarn's in charge. So warping days are their own prep days, and then I'll take the next day to weave. So.
And in terms of techniques, because you do embroider into your work, and you know it's very detailed. What are some techniques that you're excited to explore within the palette that you use?
Yeah, I mean, I use a lot of like mixing, so like a lot of gradients, and you know, shading. I love like pick and pick, which is like the vertical lines. I don't know, I use sort of like a little bit of everything. So I do like split weave for the most of my work, and then but I don't sew my slits. I just have them with little notches, so you can always sort of tell. I don't know, I sort of pick and choose about all of it depending on like what moment needs what.
We're coming to the end of my questions with you, and I just want to let everyone know that they can drop questions in the Q&A section, and I will go through them one by one and ask, point them towards Erin. But another question, which is, tell us, I mean, it's always interesting to hear about people's day-to-day and their workflow. And in your work, you know, there is a strong sense of aloneness. And you've talked about dealing with these themes of loneliness and aloneness as two separate things. Are you the sort of person who spends a lot of time by yourself, and what is your work day, and how does that, you know, align with each other?
Yeah, I mean, you know, through this whole time, it's been pretty isolated. So, but typically it's the same, you know, I wake up and I go to the studio, and it is, you know, weaving takes forever. So there is when I'm working on a piece, I'm working on a piece. So I'm going to bed and then I'm getting up and going back to work. And I'll work for like 12 to however long hours a day till I'm tired, basically. And yeah, it's a very, you know, the work sort of requires a participation with the world, you know, sort of a consumption of ideas and what's happening with the world. But I'm also very much like alone a lot. So, yeah.
And, you know, so then in that regard, has the lockdown been very different for you from has it altered your schedule much, or is it somehow, has it been easy then, or not easy, but?
It's been different. It's definitely been different because I think there's this strange, like, sort of watching people experience my life, you know? And so, like, there's this, before I had I felt a lot of comfort with watching sort of extroverts live their lives, you know? So, like I didn't have, like, FOMO. It was, like, sort of fuel, you know, someone I know is on a vacation. So, like, that's fuel for me being in the studio. And over this time, it's been like those types of people have been really suffering. You know, they're sort of experiencing aloneness and isolation for the first time. A lot of people, you know, like not seeing their family, not traveling. And so I think there's been this like I have skills that are strangely useful, but it's also sort of sad because these people don't have those skills. So you're like watching people go through these struggles of growing pains and loss. And I also think there's like this lack of platonic touch, you know, so like despite being a single person, there's also like in the normal sphere of the world, there's platonic touch, there's hugging, there's seeing people and like receiving affection and day-to-day interactions that like put a solve on the fact that like you don't have partner or you're not dating or whatever. So I think that realizing the importance of that has been interesting too. It's very different, I think, you know, and also just the uncertainty of like what is going to happen and what do we do, you know, how do we survive this time, and how long will this time last? So there's a lot of differences for sure.
Cool. Okay, I think it's time to go to questions. We have some comments too. So here's a question from Chloe Ben Sahel. What is your relationship to time and productivity as an artist?
I mean, in grad school, I was always very cognizant of the fact that I didn't want to critique the same work every time. So like, there were other people in the crafts department who we would critique the same process piece. And to me, I felt like it was completely boring. And so I wanted to make work. I felt an urgency, and I still feel an urgency of ideas and content. So when I'm working on a piece and when I'm excited about a piece, I will make the piece. I'll get it done. There isn't this, like, I don't have distractions, you know, like the work is the distraction. But, you know, as a person who is like aging and getting older and has like this idea of like, what is a life, you know, do I have a life outside of work? There is this idea of like, have I kept myself busy to avoid dealing with things? But I don't necessarily think I have, you know, like I really enjoy weaving, and weaving is something that excites me and challenges me. So I work towards shows and I work towards deadlines, and I'm always ahead of schedule. And so like, I think I'm not like a bragger, you know, like I'm a fast weaver, but I'm not a fast weaver to like show off. I'm a fast weaver because I'm excited, you know, and I have a lot of things to make. So
This
I
leads us
don't
to
know.
a nice next question, which is from Preeti Gopinath, who is the director of the MFA Textiles program that I went to at Parsons.
Oh, okay.
And she
Okay.
says your work is beautiful and moving. And she
Thank
also
you.
says, what is your favorite part in the
Hmm.
process, and what gives you most joy in your work?
I think like starting a day and feeling like dread about a detail or a moment, and then like climbing that mountain and seeing it behind you is like my favorite part. Um, Knowing that I'm capable of it, and the fact that like I just have to do it to be proud of myself, you know. I think that's like my favorite part is like sitting, drinking coffee, thinking about how hard it's going to be, and then doing it. And I think that's like um, being able, you know, like seeing the challenge in front of me and just being able to do it. And I think there's also like there'll be times when like the color is just perfect, the shadow is just perfect, and I've, you know, or there's like those moments of like the math is just incredibly like great, you know, like everything is just working out perfectly with details. And I am like, I feel my skill, you know, I feel my knowledge. Um, and I think that's when it's fun, when you're just kind of like moving and cruising and, you know, it's working. So.
Dr. Kole Odutola asks, does it need bravery to project nudity in your artworks?
Hmm. I don't think so. I mean, I think I have always felt like a very separate, like a separation between, well, you know, as a young person, you're sort of taught, especially nowadays, that like intimate images, there's always this idea that like privacy isn't real, that people can be hacked, your images can be shared, no one's to be trusted, or like phones can be stolen. And so there was always this like acceptance of like privacy as this like facade, and that like no, you know, like sort of like your partner's, it's their choice, or it's their sort of responsibility if you share this, to hold it and to keep it private. And so I've always sort of accepted that like the images, there's a possibility that somebody could see these images, and I've accepted that since I was a teenager. And so I think that allowed this work to be easily revealed. But I do think, you know, there are moments when I feel like the work, you know, like when I remember that my mother sees the work, you know, or like my stepdad just got on Instagram. And so there's like this strange level of like, they've seen me naked almost constantly. And, but then there's like, it's a separation because it is a tapestry. So there is this distance. So it's slightly normal now. Yeah. In my day to day, I'm pretty modest. You know, I'm not like going, you know, like in the way I present myself, I'm very modest. So I think like the work balances out that.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question specifically about the composition books, which, you know, there's a Anne Marie Miller. She says they're also like self-portraits. And she says, she wonders what's next in terms of imagery in your work. And are you going to continue to dwell on the notion of the self, or go beyond this? And maybe, I mean, you do involve subject matter that supports activism, which is the question. But what about the self? Where do you stand on that subject?
Yeah, I think I have always sort of operated with the idea that like I am the vessel that consumes things. And so there is this, I am a white person, so I am consuming things in a way that is very specifically through my eyes and through my experiences. I don't see things that other people experience. And so there's a lot of things I want to say about like racism and like white supremacy, but there is that those things don't inflict violence on me in a very active way. I do experience violence because of them, but that trauma, you know, sort of being a Black person in America, that trauma isn't mine to make work about. So I think like I've always made work from my perspective. And so in many ways, the work is like based in me and rooted in me, and coming from a family that is white and middle class, lower middle class, and all of the things that my family is. So I think it will always be rooted in self-portraiture, autobiographical content. And hopefully, you know, there'll be other weavers who can make the work that needs to be made about like the Black experience, or different experiences that viewpoints that we need to also be hearing. So
this is a question from Katie that is again about, connected to what you were just talking about regarding trauma. And Katie asks, can you speak more on your perception of the transformative power of telling secrets, secrets that speak and share trauma? And what do you want your work to accomplish in highlighting the trauma that your work references?
Well, I think for me, like I want, in a very simple way, I want my family to be a more functional family. And I want, in that way, I want everyone's family to be a more functional family. And in the world, I want the community of the world to be everyone to experience things in like a healed way. So I want there to be reconciliation that's real. And I want people to have the space to heal and the space to mourn. You know, I think there's so much that is lost and experienced and put on people that they're never allowed to sort of mourn those spaces of like childhood or sexual violence or all of these things. And so I think like for me, talking about making a space to talk about the hard stuff within my work, I'm hoping that that allows people to start this sort of like opening up of secrets. You know, secrets hold power because we have shame about them, and the shame keeps us silent, it keeps us small, and it keeps us from pushing through. And if we deal with these things and sort of start to unpack these things, yeah, hopefully people, you know, hopefully these stories won't hold so much embarrassment, or like it won't reflect badly on us, on the people who experience them. They will more affect how we view the world and how we can sort of change systems that keep people silent.
Yeah, in a way, by exposing them, you're robbing these secrets of their power, which is the shame, sort of reclaiming that power. This is a question about just, you know, your own interests, and from Hussein Khanbai, who's a curator of contemporary art. And he asks, is there a specific historical textile practice outside of tapestry, of course, that you admire?
I love quilting. I love like sort of the found, you know, like the sort of like folk found fabric, like home quilter medium. I don't know, there is like, you know, ikat is also incredibly amazing, compound ikat.
I suppose
and
painted warps.
Yes. And you know, like the Kente cloth weavers, and like that, the sound of Kente cloth weavers, where it's like so sort of the clickety clacks of those looms and shuttles. And you know, there's like so much amazement about Native American tapestry. Well, that's tapestry, but it's more like rug tapestry. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it, like just the idea that there's a human being and like has these muscle memories and probably has calluses in places that I don't have calluses, and you know, like just this like sitting with a thing, and that tension, that like wanting something to work, you know, and like the magic of it working, is textiles is something that's really amazing. It has a lot of magic, I think.
So this is a similar question, but more specific. It says from Textile TV, who's an author and speaker. Um, and she says, you said in an interview that Louise Bourgeois was a great inspiration. Do you have other women artists inspiring you, writers, painters, singer? And she's a second question about how do you deal with creative block, if you ever do?
Hmm.
So
Yeah, so many people inspire me. I'm gonna have a mental block, obviously, because just the way it is. But I think so many people inspire me. I mean, Lucida Hurtado is somebody who just passed away. Her work is like kind of unbelievably inspiring because her work was made in private and sort of without, institutionalized credit. She just made work in her life, and when she was older, got esteem. So I think that Annie Albers, so many people, and I follow a lot of people on Instagram who are alive and who are making these like very raw work and vulnerable work. So many people inspire me, and I think I feel like honored that I get to even like watch people make. You inspire me too. And so creative block, I think for me, sometimes I'll weave a piece that's like been on my queue that like I know I need to make for a show, but it's not something that like I'm like pushing to make. I'm excited to make it, but it's not something that like is like urgent. It's been on the queue for a bit, and I have everything prepped, so I'll make that piece. And I'm kind of doing that right now. I'm brainstorming. So like I'm weaving a piece that I needed to weave, but I'm like every day sort of coming up with this visualization of my next piece, which has been a hard piece to understand. And I need that room, to get this piece right, to get the image right. So that, and also taking apart yarn, plying yarn, doing like the random skill, watching, like reality TV show and doing prep is like something that helps. And I'm a big proponent of sitting on my studio floor and just looking, just like being physically present in the space and feeling despair and emptiness, and then being like, it's there, it's just lower, the water's a little low, so you gotta like get it back to so yeah, I think there's always that feeling of like there's nothing else, nothing will come, I'm done. But then you realize that you're just a little tapped and you need to like rest and wash your hair, take a shower, and then figure it out,
mm-hmm.
So
there's a question about, we're at the end of our conversation. We have a couple of minutes left. So just somebody has a question about how long does a large scale piece take from conception to completion? And for me, are you working on pieces simultaneously? Because you do have multiple looms, or are you just focused on one and then moving to the next?
I work on one at a time, mostly because like the big loom and the medium loom I work at most of the time have different weights of yarn. So like I'll prep, the big loom I use almost double of what I use on the medium loom. So the prep is different. And so right now, but this one I'm sort of brainstorming about. When I am like sort of tired of weaving, I'll prep yarn for the big one. So there is like a jumping back and forth, but I don't weave because I'm always worried about like running out of yarn, or running out of a color. So like I'll work on one piece, make it, finish it, and then I'll go to the next piece because I don't want to like run out of a dye lot or like a color. So.
Mm-hmm. So we're at the end of our conversation. I just want to ask you, how can people get involved in your textile art?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I can send maybe put a link in the questions. But you know, through my Instagram, there you can DM me. Let me see if I can put this as an answer to one of the questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Great. So that's, I've just to explain to people again, remind people, this is a group that Erin is helping organize, where she's gathering textile artists to come together and organize for democracy. So if you want to get involved.
Yeah, I answered the question. So if you go to the answered questions, it's from the, and there's hopefully that link will work, and you can register for the Zoom for later tonight.
So if you go to the Q&A box button at the bottom of the screen, everybody, and then click on the middle section which says answered, and Erin has answered Laura Kaufman, and there's a link, and it's at 5 p.m. today. Join the conversation. Oh God, that's a good sign to end. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.